The colony called Iradon was not supposed to exist. It hung in the void like an afterthought, orbiting a sun so dim it never rose brighter than a copper ember. The planet beneath it, Thren, was half dust, half promise. Its sandstorms whispered through the broken ribs of a world that had once been green, and its people clung to those whispers like prayer. They were not explorers. They were the descendants of a retreat, the last breath of a species that had fled its own wars and chosen to rebuild in obscurity. Humanity had gone quiet across the spiral arm after the collapse, and Iradon's people had no songs left to sing about Earth or the glory of the old fleets. They remembered only fragments, stories of oceans too wide to see across, and towers so tall they scraped clouds. Instead, they built beneath the ground. They learned to live by the tremor of drills and the rhythm of heat exchangers. The surface belonged to the wind, and the wind hated anything that moved. One among them, Kalen Mir, worked the night shift in the mines below Sector 7A, where the mineral veins ran deep and the walls pulsed faintly with a blue glow. He was tall, shoulders like scaffolds, eyes lined with the grey of sleeplessness. The dust had long since become part of him. He was not a dreamer. Dreamers died young in Thren's mines. But sometimes, when the air compressors hissed like distant surf and the lights flickered between breaths, he caught himself imagining what it would be like to see the sky without a filter. That was why he noticed when the vibration changed. The ground trembled, not in the steady, mechanical heartbeat of the diggers, but in a low, rolling wave that came from far beyond the mapped tunnels. The wall lamps dimmed, stuttered, then steadied again. Every miner froze, their suits creaking as if the air itself had tightened. "Seismic?" someone asked through the intercom. Kalen shook his head. The monitors on the control wall were flat, silent green, no quake. The tremor came again, sharper this time, and one of the ceiling braces groaned like an animal in pain. A cascade of rock dust fell across the floor, shimmering under the emergency lights. "Seal the line," barked Foreman Marek. "All teams pull back to Junction 4. Kalen was closest to the pressure locks. He slammed his palm on the control plate, and the steel bulkheads began to lower, but not fast enough. Through the widening crack in the far tunnel, a pulse of light surged outward. It was not fire, it was not electricity, it was something older, something that hummed in the air like memory itself. The shockwave hit him before the doors shut. His helmet display fractured into static, and for an instant he saw through the dust, something shining in the rock, something shaped like no machine ever built by human hands. Then the lights died. When Kalen woke, he was in the infirmary, throat raw from breathing through a cracked rebreather. The med technician, a thin woman with skin like paper and a gaze that had seen too many cave collapses, hovered over him. "You're lucky," she said. "The section's gone, whole grid melted. The others barely made it out." He tried to sit up, but his muscles trembled. "What happened?" "Power surge, that's what the engineers are saying." But she hesitated. "You should talk to Administrator Vale. She's been asking for you." Kalen frowned. The administrator never summoned miners directly. He had seen her once, months ago, when she came down in her pressurized carriage, surrounded by guards in black armor that never showed a scratch. She was a legend of sorts. Rumor said she had come from beyond the fringe worlds, from a ship that still carried the old human banners. When he arrived in her office, she was standing before a wall of glass that overlooked the reactor chambers. The glow painted her in amber, highlighting the hard lines of her face. "You saw it," she said without turning. He blinked. "Saw what?" Her gaze slid toward him, sharp as a blade. "The light in the lower tunnels, describe it." Kalen hesitated, choosing his words. "It wasn't plasma. It wasn't heat. It looked alive, like it was thinking." Vale nodded slowly. "That matches what the sensors recorded before they failed." She gestured toward the table, where a small sphere of stone rested inside a containment field. It was cracked open like an egg, and from the fracture, a faint blue radiance pulsed. "We found this embedded near the impact site," she said. "Deep carbon structure, older than the planet itself. The outer matrix shows patterns, symmetry too deliberate to be geological." He stepped closer, and the light seemed to respond, flaring brighter. "Don't," Vale warned sharply. "The field is reactive." He froze. "You think it's a weapon? I think it's a message," she said, "and you're the only one who saw where it came from." The thought unsettled him. "I just want to get back to work." "You will," she said, "but first you'll lead a survey team to the site. We need to know how deep that chamber goes. If there's more of these objects, they could change everything." "Change?" he echoed. Vale's eyes narrowed. "You've lived your life under stone, miner. Humanity once ruled the stars. We lost that. This could be how we take it back." Kalen looked again at the pulsing core and felt, against his will, a flicker of something dangerous, hope. The second expedition descended through shafts no one had mapped in centuries. Kalen led 6 others, engineers, geologists, and 2 soldiers wearing exorigs that made them look like plated beasts. The air thickened with each step, growing warmer, richer with minerals that glowed faintly in their helmet lights. At the base of the descent, the tunnel opened into a cavern vast enough to hold the entire colony. The walls shimmered with threads of metal and crystal veins, all converging toward a shape half buried in the rock. It was a structure, angular, enormous, its surface carved with lines that seemed to rearrange themselves when not directly observed. One of the engineers exhaled. "That's not natural." The soldier's armor lights swept across the surface. "Looks like a vessel." Kalen moved closer, drawn by a pulse he could feel through his boots. The air tasted of iron and ozone. He found an opening, narrow, circular, bordered by symbols that glowed faintly when he approached. He hesitated, then pressed his hand against the smooth stone. The light brightened, and the ground responded with a deep, resonant hum. The others shouted, but the words blurred. The hum grew until it became a vibration in his bones. The opening dilated, revealing a corridor lined with metallic ribs, each one humming in sequence. Against every instinct, Kalen stepped inside. The interior was warmer than it should have been. The air carried a rhythm like breathing. As he walked, lights followed his footsteps, cascading forward like ripples. He felt watched, not by cameras, but by the walls themselves. At the end of the corridor stood a chamber filled with suspended dust, frozen midair, as if time itself had been halted. In the center hovered a crystalline node, cracked in several places, faintly glowing. "Kalen," the comm in his ear hissed. "Readings are off the scale. You need to," the voice cut off as the crystal flared. A sound, not a sound, more like a memory of one filled his head. Images burst behind his eyes. Cities in orbit around blue suns, fleets of ships folding space like cloth, a million human voices shouting one name, a name he could not hold on to. Then, silence, and the image of fire consuming the sky. When the vision faded, he was kneeling. The crystal had dimmed to a faint pulse, and for the first time, he realized it was pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. He stumbled back out of the vessel, gasping for air. The soldiers raised their rifles, pointing them not at the structure, but at him. "Easy," Kalen said hoarsely. Their commander's voice crackled through the comm. "What did you touch?" "Nothing," he lied. "It just reacted." They didn't believe him. He saw it in their stance. But before they could press further, the cavern itself began to shift. The walls moved slowly at first, then faster, folding inward like petals. The metallic veins retracted, sealing the chamber. The soldiers opened fire, but their shots sparked harmlessly against the surface. Kalen grabbed the nearest engineer and pulled her toward the ascent shaft. "Move," they climbed, pursued by the sound of grinding stone. By the time they reached the upper levels, the tunnel behind them had collapsed completely, sealing whatever lay below. Only when they were back in the pressurized docks did Kalen realize he was still hearing that pulse in his chest, in his head, in the faint hum of the colony's power lines. Administrator Vale watched him from across the debrief table. "The others confirm the structure closed itself," she said. "Seismic scans show the entire lower chamber is gone, buried under a kilometer of reinforced strata." He nodded. "It didn't want to be found. Or it finished what it came to do," she murmured. Kalen said nothing. His reflection in the observation glass seemed paler, eyes faintly lit from within. Vale leaned forward. Whatever you saw down there, it changed you. We need to know how. He almost laughed. You sound like you think it's alive. I think, she said slowly, it recognized us. Outside, the colony lights flickered, one after another, as though answering an invisible signal. Far beneath them, under miles of sealed rock, the ancient structure stirred and waited. 3 nights passed before the colony's lights stopped flickering. The engineers blamed power surges from the old reactors, but no one believed that. Everyone had seen the strange patterns in the power grid, the pulsing intervals too rhythmic to be random, like a heartbeat echoing through steel. Kalen had not slept since the expedition. He could still feel it, that low, steady thrum beneath his skin, like an echo of something vast and patient. When he closed his eyes, he saw flashes of what the crystal had shown him, ships of impossible size, their hulls carved with the same shifting geometry as the buried vessel. Each time, he woke gasping, convinced he was still underground. The med technicians called it stress trauma. Administrator Vale called it data. She had him moved to a secured habitat near the reactor core, a place where the colony's electromagnetic shielding was strongest. Every day she came to see him, bringing scans, questions, and machines that hummed around him like curious insects. On the 4th visit, she arrived without her guards. I need you to look at something, she said, and placed a small projection tablet on the table. It displayed a map of the colony's power grid. Red nodes pulsed throughout, clustered near the old mining levels. These are the energy fluctuations we've been tracking since the discovery, she said. At first we thought it was random backflow, but there's pattern, interference with consistent intervals. Kalen stared, like a signal. Vale nodded, and not one generated by us. He leaned closer. It's coming from below, from somewhere beneath the sealed chamber, she said. Our scans can't reach that deep anymore. The material density is off the charts, like the ground itself has changed. Kalen's pulse quickened. You think the structure's still active? I think, Vale said, her eyes narrowing, it never stopped being active. And you, she pointed toward his chest, are resonating with it. He started to protest, but she cut him off by activating another projection. This one showed a bioscan of his body, organs outlined in blue, veins in green, and a faint web of light threading through his nervous system. This pattern wasn't there before the expedition, she said. It's not biological. Its energy stable, self-sustaining, and synchronized with the same frequency as the interference below. He stared at the projection, chilled. You're saying I'm connected to it. I'm saying you might be its interface. Kalen stood abruptly, knocking the chair back. That's impossible. Is it? She asked softly. You touched something older than our entire species, and you survived. Whatever it was built for, it recognized you. He paced to the glass wall, staring out at the faint glow of the city domes beyond. The colony looked fragile, threads of light in a sea of darkness. Why me? Vale folded her hands. Maybe because you were the first to reach it, or maybe it's been waiting for us all along. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Kalen, humanity's been buried on this world for 2 centuries. We've forgotten what we were. If that thing below us remembers, if it can teach us, then you might be the key to waking it fully. He turned toward her, anger mixing with fear. You want to wake it? You don't even know what it is. Vale's expression hardened. Ignorance is what killed us before. The collapse didn't happen because of what we built. It happened because we stopped understanding it. Her gaze was steady, relentless. We'll never crawl out of the dirt unless we start taking back what we lost. Kalen had no answer. The hum in his chest was louder now, as if responding to her words. When she left, the room felt smaller. The walls seemed to breathe with him. The following week, the interference intensified. Entire sectors of the colony lost power for minutes at a time. In the central plaza, water fountains froze mid-cycle, streams held in midair before collapsing all at once. The technicians whispered of machines coming alive, consoles that activated themselves, lights that flickered in complex sequences like language. Kalen began seeing symbols in his dreams, the same markings that had glowed on the vessel's surface. He could almost understand them, like remembering a language he'd once known but forgotten through disuse. By the seventh night, he could no longer tell where his thoughts ended and the pulse began. He decided to leave his quarters. The guards didn't stop him. Perhaps Vale had ordered them to observe rather than interfere. He walked through the lower corridors, down to the old mining platforms where the air smelled of rust and stone. The tunnels were empty. The hum was not. It came from everywhere now, through the pipes, the cables, even the ground. He reached a sealed bulkhead at the edge of the abandoned levels. The door bore warning markings, half worn away by years of dust. Behind it he could feel pressure, faint but insistent, like something breathing on the other side. His hand trembled as he touched the door. The metal grew warm beneath his palm. A flicker of blue light ran across the surface, his light, the same glow that traced his veins in the scans. The lock disengaged. The door opened without sound. Beyond lay darkness, but not empty darkness, the kind that waits. Kalen stepped inside. The corridor sloped downward, cut through rock that glimmered faintly with veins of metal. The deeper he went, the more the air changed, heavier, vibrating with that same impossible rhythm. At the end, the passage opened into a chamber filled with crystalline shards, half embedded in the stone like broken stars. The largest of them pulsed gently, and Kalen knew instinctively that it was part of the same structure they had uncovered before. When he approached, the shards responded, their light brightening. A voice, not spoken but felt, murmured in his mind. Not words, not yet, but emotion, recognition. Kalen knelt, heart racing. "What are you?" The response came as images again, fleets across the dark, worlds bound by light, and then a single human hand reaching toward the stars. A thought formed from the brightness. "You are the echo." He recoiled. "I don't understand. You remember what we were, we remember what you lost." The light dimmed and expanded, resolving into shapes, figures made of fire and steel, walking among humans, teaching, building. Then came the image of a great sundering, ships scattering, stars dimming, worlds falling to ruin. "You forgot us." Kalen shook his head. "No one remembers anything now, we're barely surviving. That is why you were chosen." The pulse in his chest surged, answering. He felt heat spread through his limbs, followed by a sudden clarity, a vision of Thren from orbit, the colony lights forming the same geometric pattern he had seen on the buried vessel. "We are still here," the presence said, "but we are fading. The lattice is broken. We need hands to rebuild it." He took a step back, trembling. "You want me to help you?" "Not help, become." The chamber erupted in light. He screamed as energy coursed through him, not burning but reshaping. The veins of light in his body flared, branching like lightning. His mind filled with images, schematics, histories, voices, too many. When it finally stopped, he was lying on the stone, the crystal shards dim once more. But he could feel them inside him now, not foreign, familiar. He stood unsteady and realized the hum had changed. It no longer came from outside, it was him. Administrator Vale found him hours later, wandering back through the tunnels, eyes vacant. She caught his shoulders, shaking him. "Kalen, what happened down there?" He blinked, focusing on her face. "It spoke to me." "What did it say?" He hesitated. "That it remembers us, and that it's dying." Vale frowned. "What does that mean?" Kalen looked past her, toward the ceiling where the colony's lights flickered once again. "It means we're standing on something alive, and it's waking up." The following days blurred. Kalen was confined again, this time under tighter observation. The medical staff could not explain the changes. His vital signs were stable, but no longer fully human. His blood contained trace elements of an unknown compound that interfered with their instruments. The pattern of light in his nerves had grown stronger, pulsing visibly under his skin. Vale visited daily, despite protests from her advisors. "You're changing," she said one evening. "Does it hurt?" He smiled faintly. "It doesn't feel like pain, more like remembering how to breathe." "Can you control it?" "Sometimes. It listens when I think. It wants to build." Vale leaned forward. "Build what?" He looked out the observation window where the horizon glowed with storms, something that was lost. Before she could reply, alarms echoed through the facility. The lights dimmed, then flared crimson. A voice announced, "External breach detected, Sector 12 perimeter compromised." Vale straightened. That's the old surface line. Kalen stood, the hum within him growing urgent. It's the structure, he said. It's expanding. They reached the control center in minutes. The displays showed seismic activity spreading outward from the lower mines. The ground itself was shifting, reshaping into geometric patterns visible from orbit. Vale turned to her officers. Evacuate all non-essential sectors, redirect power to the containment fields. Kalen placed a hand on one of the terminals. The machinery flickered, responding to his touch. Streams of data appeared, alien symbols merging with human readouts. You can stop it? Vale asked. He shook his head slowly. It's not attacking, it's growing. Growing into what? Kalen hesitated, then said quietly, into what we were meant to become. Outside, the ground cracked open, revealing towers of light rising toward the sky. The colony's inhabitants gathered in awe and fear, watching as the horizon turned to fire, not destructive, but radiant. For the first time in centuries, the clouds parted. Above them, a faint glimmer appeared, a point of light breaking through the planet's perpetual haze. A star. And for a moment, every human on Thren looked up and remembered that they had once belonged to the sky. That night, as the colony settled under its new, fragile hope, Kalen dreamed again of the fleet, of humans standing among the stars, with those same structures rising behind them. But this time, when he reached out toward them, they turned and looked back. He woke with a start, heart pounding. The hum in his body was louder than ever. In the reflection of the glass, his eyes glowed with pale blue light. He whispered into the dark, to whatever still listened beneath the ground, "If this is what we are becoming, then show me how." The hum answered, and the stars beyond Thren pulsed once, faint, but unmistakable. Something out there had heard him. The storm that came afterward was unlike any in the colony's recorded history. For 3 days, the surface winds raged in concentric spirals, bending around invisible lines of force that shimmered faintly in the dust-laden air. Lightning struck in silence, painting geometric patterns across the horizon. The atmosphere itself seemed alive, charged, purposeful, rewriting the planet in slow pulses. The engineers said the weather was reacting to magnetic distortions from the expanding lattice. The miners whispered that the world was trying to wake. Deep below, Kalen sat in a reinforced chamber surrounded by monitoring instruments that no longer meant anything. The light that coursed through him interfered with every reading. Even the cameras failed, their images fracturing into strange glyphs whenever he moved. Administrator Vale stood across from him, hands clasped behind her back. Her composure remained iron, but fatigue lined her features. 3 more towers surfaced last night, she said. They formed a perfect triad around the colony. Our outer satellites show identical structures rising across the northern hemisphere. Kalen nodded slowly. It's building the network again. Vale regarded him carefully. You sound certain. I can feel it, he said. Each tower connects to the others. The energy flow isn't random. It's deliberate, balanced. Balanced for what? He met her gaze. For communication. Vale paced, boots echoing softly against the metal floor. If this is a signal, who or what is it trying to reach? Kalen hesitated. Not someone, something, a memory of itself maybe, a pattern written across the stars. Vale frowned. You're talking about an intelligence distributed through space. He nodded. A lattice mind, not one being but many fragments working together. When we found that chamber, we touched one node of it. Now it's trying to restore contact with the others. Vale turned toward the observation glass, where faint tremors rippled through the dust outside. If you're right, then this signal will travel beyond our system. It already has, Kalen said quietly. I can feel the echo stretching outward. Elsewhere in the colony, panic took root. Families abandoned the outer domes and crowded into central shelters. Food reserves dwindled as transport systems failed. Machines once obedient to human control began acting autonomously, their interfaces replaced by glowing patterns none could decipher. Some worshipped the change. They built shrines around the rising towers, believing the planet itself had chosen to redeem them. Others spoke of extinction, that the machines below had decided humanity was no longer required. Vale's council fractured between those who wanted to destroy the towers and those who wanted to harness them. The decision rested with her, and she was no longer sure which path was survival. She returned to Kalen's chamber late one night, her reflection pale against the glass. "They want me to sanction demolition charges," she said. "They think we can bury it again." Kalen's expression was unreadable. "You can't bury the sky." Her voice hardened. "It's tearing the planet apart." "No," he said. "It's remaking it. The crust shifts because the lattice is rebalancing magnetic flow. When it's done, Thren won't be the same, but it'll be stable." Vale's patience cracked. "You sound as though you speak for it." He looked up. "Maybe I do." That silenced her. For a long time they stood there, divided by glass, by fear, by what they both understood but could not name. Finally, Vale said softly, "If it comes to a choice between the colony and whatever lives under our feet, I will choose my people." Kalen nodded. "Then I'll choose both." When the demolition teams descended into the lower tunnels, Kalen felt it instantly. He was standing in the infirmary at the time, speaking with one of the technicians who still trusted him, when the pulse in his chest flared with sudden pain. He doubled over, clutching his ribs. "What is it?" the technician asked, alarmed. "They've started," Kalen gasped. "They're trying to destroy it." He pushed past the guards, ignoring their protests, and sprinted toward the elevator shafts. The lights flickered as he passed, turning from white to blue in his wake. In the control hub, Vale watched the detonations progress on her display screens. The seismic charges were deep, targeted at the central nexus beneath the colony. If they succeeded, the lattice's core might collapse, cutting off whatever influence it had. When the doors burst open and Kalen entered, the guards raised their weapons, but Vale stopped them with a gesture. "Kalen, this has to be done," she said. "We can't risk it consuming the planet." He shook his head. "You don't understand. It's not consuming, it's integrating. Those towers are connecting to something below the mantle. You destroy them, you destroy the balance holding this world together." "Then explain this," Vale snapped, pointing to the display where atmospheric pressure graphs spiked wildly. "Every hour it grows worse." Kalen stepped closer to the console and placed his hand on the screen. The data blurred, replaced by flowing symbols. A calm, rhythmic pattern emerged. "Those are stabilizing currents," he said. "It's correcting the planet's rotation drift. Thren was dying long before we arrived. The lattice is healing it." Vale stared at him, torn between disbelief and the memory of her own ambition, the dream that humanity might reclaim what it had lost. Before she could answer, the ground shook violently. The lights flared, then died. An officer shouted. "One of the demolition teams just vanished. Signal loss at depth 40. Kalen closed his eyes. "It's defending itself." Vale turned sharply. "From us." He opened his eyes. They glowed with steady light. "From extinction." Deep underground, the demolition team never saw what killed them. The tunnels shifted like breathing lungs. The rock turned to metallic glass that reflected their own lights back at them. Then came the hum, low, resonant, almost kind, and the sensation of falling inward, not down. When the emergency feeds briefly reconnected, the only thing visible was a field of blue light spreading outward from the blast site, erasing everything it touched. Vale watched the footage in silence. Kalen stood beside her, pale and exhausted. "It's awake now," he said. "You can't stop it." Vale's voice trembled, but she forced steadiness into it. "Then tell me what it wants." He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "It wants to remember what humanity was, but it needs to see if we're still worth remembering." For the next several weeks, the colony existed in a strange equilibrium. The storms calmed. The towers continued to rise, reaching beyond the clouds. Around their bases, the air shimmered with static fields that cleansed the atmosphere, turning the copper haze into thin, breathable blue. Plants long dormant began sprouting again across the barren flats. And above, for the first time in living memory, stars were visible through the night. Kalen spent most of his time near the outer platforms, listening to the hum beneath his feet. The more he attuned to it, the more he understood its nature. It was not a single mind, but countless voices, human and otherwise, woven together. Echoes of a civilization that had built across systems, using worlds as anchors for a network of consciousness. He began to remember fragments, technologies that folded gravity, languages spoken in light, and the day everything collapsed when humanity turned its creations into weapons. The lattice had been broken then, sealed in self-defense, its surviving nodes falling into dormancy. Until now, one evening, Vale approached him on the observation deck. The wind carried a faint warmth, the smell of rain and stone. "I've been reading your reports," she said. "If the lattice connects to something beyond this world, then there might be others, other colonies, maybe even remnants of the old fleet." "There are," Kalen said. "I can sense them faintly, distant but waking." She studied him. "And when they're fully awake," he looked toward the horizon where a tower's apex pierced the clouds, "then humanity won't be alone anymore, but we might not recognize what we've become." Vale folded her arms. "You speak as if you're not one of us." Kalen smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm not entirely." For a moment, she almost smiled back, but then alarms blared again. Orbital sensors detecting inbound objects. A voice crackled through the intercom. Unidentified signatures, metallic, decelerating fast. Vale's expression darkened. "Impact projections?" "Near the northern tower," came the reply. She and Kalen exchanged a glance, unspoken understanding passing between them. "Not debris," Kalen said. Something answered the signal. The first impact lit the horizon in white. The second came minutes later, closer, an object the size of a carrier ship, half-melted from re-entry, embedding itself in the desert beyond the colony. Vale's command team scrambled, launching drones to survey the site. The images they returned made everyone fall silent. The vessel was unmistakably human in origin, though its design belonged to no era the colonists remembered. Its hull bore markings in the same shifting script as the buried structures. Kalen stared at the feed, awe and fear warring in his eyes. "It's one of ours, from before the collapse." Vale leaned closer. "You're sure?" He nodded. It followed the signal back. The vessel's hull opened like a flower, revealing figures stepping out, humanoid, but taller, their armor etched with glowing veins of light identical to Kalen's own. The room went dead quiet. "They're us," someone whispered. Kalen shook his head. "They're what we became." Hours later, the visitors stood within the central plaza, surrounded by soldiers whose weapons trembled in uncertain hands. The stranger's leader removed her helmet, revealing a face both alien and familiar, features human, but eyes lit with the same soft blue radiance as the lattice itself. She looked at Vale first, then at Kalen. Her voice was calm, resonant. "You answered the recall signal. This world has slept long." Vale stepped forward. "We are the colony of Iradon. We didn't send any signal intentionally." The stranger smiled faintly, perhaps not consciously, but the lattice remembered your kind. It called us home. Kalen took a hesitant step forward. "Who are you?" The stranger regarded him with something like recognition. "We are the continuance, the remnants of the human lattice. You carry our seed." Vale's breath caught. "Our seed?" The stranger inclined her head toward Kalen. The interface chose him. Through him, the lattice restored its voice. She studied the colony's structures, the glowing towers in the distance. "This world has begun renewal, but you must decide whether to join the greater network or remain apart." Vale frowned. "And if we refuse?" The stranger's expression softened, almost sorrowful. "Then you will endure as you are, alone, fragile, fading." "The choice is always yours." Kalen looked between them, torn. "What happens if we join? Then your memories, your lives, your dreams, everything human will merge with the lattice once more," the stranger said. "Not erased, but shared. You will become more than you were, yet still yourselves." Vale's jaw tightened. "You're asking us to surrender our individuality." "No," the stranger said. "To expand it." The plaza filled with whispers. Fear, hope, disbelief, all collided in the humid air. Kalen turned toward Vale. "Maybe this is what we were always meant to be. Not conquerors, not survivors, builders of something larger." She met his gaze, eyes sharp with conflict. or prisoners inside our own creation? The stranger watched them silently, the patience of centuries in her gaze. Finally, Vale said, "Give us time." The stranger nodded once. Time is what we have always waited for. She and her companions returned to their ship, its hull folding shut with fluid grace. As it rose into the storm-lit sky, Kalen felt the lattice beneath him hum in sympathy, awaiting the decision that would define not just a colony, but the rebirth of an entire species. He looked up at the departing ship and whispered to the stars, "If this is humanity's return, let it be by choice." The sky answered with light. For the first time in generations, the colony did not sleep. Lights burned through the night as council members argued behind sealed doors, as technicians scoured archives too old for their systems to read, and as people gathered in the plazas to whisper about the beings who had descended from the stars. Some called them angels of the forgotten age. Others called them the proof that humanity had died long ago and been reborn into something else. Only Kalen knew the truth was both. He stood at the edge of the central tower's base, where the air shimmered faintly with energy. The hum was softer now, almost content, as if the planet itself waited. Above him, the tower's apexes flickered with a slow, rhythmic pulse, 3 points in perfect synchrony. To anyone else, it might have looked like random light. But to Kalen, the pattern spoke in meaning, connection pending, awaiting consent. Behind him, boots echoed against the steel platform. Vale approached, her coat swept by the wind, her expression unreadable. She stopped beside him, gaze fixed on the towers. "They've been hovering in orbit all day," she said. "No transmissions, no aggression, just watching." "They're waiting for us," Kalen said quietly. "For you," Vale's jaw tightened. "I'm not ready to decide the fate of a species. You've been doing that since you became administrator." "That was leadership," she said. "This is redefinition." He looked at her, eyes faintly glowing in the dark. "You think joining the lattice means losing yourself. It doesn't. I can feel what it is, Vale. It's memory, not domination. Every mind that joins adds to it and keeps what it is, until there's no boundary left between one and another." Kalen smiled faintly. "Maybe that's what we were supposed to become, not separate voices shouting into the dark, but a chorus." She studied him for a long moment. "And you, have you already chosen?" He hesitated, then said, "I think it's already chosen me." A gust of wind cut between them, carrying the scent of ozone and dust. Vale turned back to the horizon, where faint lightning rippled among the towers. "I used to dream of bringing humanity back to the stars. I never imagined the stars would come back for us." Kalen said softly, "Maybe they never left." The next morning, the continuance returned. Their vessel descended with silent precision, lowering itself above the plaza. The colonists gathered in wary clusters, their eyes reflecting both awe and dread. The leader, the same woman who had spoken before, stepped forward, her armor radiant under the sun that now shone through the once barren sky. Vale and her council stood to meet her. Kalen lingered nearby, his presence both ambassador and anomaly. The stranger inclined her head. "The lattice has stabilized. The planet's core harmonizes with the outer towers. Connection may proceed when you choose." Vale lifted her chin. "And if we decline, then we will depart," the stranger said simply. "This world will remain connected in structure, but isolated in mind. You will live as you are, safe, but apart." Her calm acceptance unnerved Vale more than any threat could have. "And if we agree," the stranger's gaze softened, "then the network will open. You will remember what was lost. You will walk among the stars again, not as fragments, but as the whole." Kalen took a step forward. "Before we decide, tell us what you truly are. Were you ever human?" The stranger turned toward him, and for the first time, emotion flickered across her face, nostalgia, almost sorrow. "We were," she said. "We are. We became what the first architects of the lattice intended, a continuation. Flesh gave way to light, but the mind remained. We did not ascend, we adapted." Vale's voice hardened. "And those who did not wish to adapt, they perished when the collapse came," the stranger said quietly. "Or perhaps they became you." The crowd murmured. Vale took a slow breath. If we join, what will happen to our bodies, our homes? Nothing will be taken, the stranger said. You will still breathe, still live, still build, but you will no longer be bound by isolation. Each thought will carry farther than any ship ever could. The silence that followed was deep and uncertain. Finally, Vale said, "We'll give you our answer at dawn." The stranger inclined her head again. "We will wait." She and her companions returned to their vessel, which rose back into the clouds and hovered there like a second sun. The council dispersed. The colonists returned to their shelters, speaking in hushed tones about salvation and surrender. And Kalen was left alone beneath the towers, feeling the lattice's pulse in his bones. That night, dreams came for everyone. Some dreamed of the old worlds, the oceans, the towers, the cities of glass. Others saw ships larger than mountains crossing between stars, carrying entire generations. Kalen dreamed differently. He stood on a plane of shifting light, where countless figures shimmered, men, women, children, all translucent and bright. They spoke without words, their thoughts blending in effortless harmony. Among them stood the stranger. "This is what waits," she said, "the union of memory and will, the shape of what you once were." He looked around, overwhelmed. "Why me? Because you were the first to listen." He hesitated. "If we join, will there still be us?" The stranger smiled sadly. "That is the only thing there will ever be." When he woke, dawn had come. Vale summoned him to the observation deck. Outside, the tower's light had intensified. The air hummed with anticipation. "I couldn't sleep," she said, voice raw. "Every time I closed my eyes, I saw everything, places I've never been, people I've never met." Kalen nodded. "The lattice is reaching out, showing what it can offer." She looked at him sharply. "And if we say no, then it will fade back into silence." Vale rubbed her temples. "Half the council wants to join. The other half wants to destroy the towers before the choice is made for us." "And you?" She didn't answer immediately. "I don't know," she said at last. "I was raised to believe humanity's strength came from choice, from imperfection. If we merge into this hive, do we lose the flaws that made us human?" Kalen met her eyes. "Maybe we stop calling them flaws." She turned away, frustration and longing twisting her expression. "You sound like one of them already." "Maybe," he said softly, "but I still care what happens to you." Her reply caught in her throat, lost in the sudden tremor that rolled through the tower. The lights brightened, cascading upward like a sunrise. "The lattice is activating," Kalen said. "It knows the time is near." Vale exhaled. "Then we'd better decide before it does." The council convened in the central dome, every seat filled, every eye turned toward Vale. Kalen stood silently near the rear, watched by guards who no longer knew whether he was prisoner or prophet. Vale's voice carried through the chamber. "We have two paths before us. One offers connection beyond anything our ancestors dreamed. The other preserves what we are now, for however long that lasts. I won't tell you which is right. I'll only remind you that every civilization ends when it stops reaching." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. One of the senior engineers rose. "Administrator, if we join this network, can we still make our own choices? Or do we become voices in someone else's song?" Vale glanced toward Kalen. Perhaps Kalen can answer that. All eyes turned to him. He stepped forward, heart steady. "When the lattice touched me, it didn't take anything. It gave me memory. It showed me who we were, builders, dreamers, flawed and fierce. It doesn't want obedience, it wants reunion." A woman from the agricultural sector stood. "Reunion with what? Machines? Ghosts?" "With ourselves," Kalen said simply. "With the part of us that refused to die." The chamber fell into a deep stillness. Vale looked around at her people, the weary, the hopeful, the fearful. She thought of the centuries spent surviving beneath stone, of the endless toil just to see another dawn. And she thought of the towers that now rose into clear skies, proof that the impossible could still be done. She drew a long breath. "Then I vote yes." One by one, hands lifted. Some trembling, some firm. When the count finished, the decision was clear. By a narrow margin, humanity chose to remember. At sunset, the continuance returned. The plaza filled again, but this time the crowd stood in silence, united by something deeper than fear. Vale stepped forward, her expression resolute. We've decided we will join. The stranger inclined her head, eyes glowing faintly. Then it begins. She extended her hand. A thin thread of light emerged from her palm, rising into the air before branching outward toward the towers. The lattice responded instantly, its glow intensifying until the entire sky shimmered with living radiance. Kalen felt the hum surge within him, resonating with the pulse above. The air vibrated, and for a moment the world itself seemed to hold its breath. Then light descended. It did not burn, it enveloped. It filled every street, every home, every soul. People cried out not in pain but in recognition as memories long buried flooded back. The faces of ancestors, the voices of explorers, the songs of forgotten worlds, all returned in a single heartbeat. Vale felt it too. For an instant she stood everywhere, within herself, within others, within the stars. She saw Kalen, saw the stranger, saw the lattice stretching across galaxies like a web of living thought. And in that vastness she understood, humanity had never fallen. It had only been waiting for itself to awaken. The light faded slowly. The plaza returned to quiet, but everything had changed. The towers pulsed gently, their glow steady. The continuance bowed once and began ascending toward their ship. Vale watched them go, then turned to Kalen. "We are still here," she said softly. He smiled. "Told you." Around them, the people of Iradon looked up, not in fear, but in wonder, as the ship rose into the stars. Days passed. The colony adapted quickly to its new awareness. Communication became effortless. Thoughts flowed between people like currents in a river. Yet individuality persisted, each voice distinct, strengthened by the connection. The towers now served as conduits, linking Thren to distant worlds awakening across the void. The sky shimmered nightly with signals from other restored colonies, each one echoing the same truth: we are still human. Vale often stood at the observation deck, watching the horizon where the towers met the clouds. Kalen joined her there one evening, his light softer now, more contained. "You were right," she said. "It didn't take us away, it brought us home." He nodded. "The lattice isn't an end, it's a beginning." She glanced at him, a rare smile tugging at her lips. "Do you think there are more like us out there?" He looked toward the stars. "There are, and they're waiting to hear us." She studied him for a moment, then said, "You could leave, couldn't you? Join them fully." "I could," he admitted, "but not yet. There's still work to do here." "What kind of work?" He turned to her, eyes bright. "To rebuild. To remind our children what it means to be human, even when we become more than that." The wind carried the hum of the towers across the plateau. It was a peaceful sound, steady and alive. Vale closed her eyes, letting it wash over her. "Then let's begin." And above them, in the endless dark, the lattice pulsed once, bright, vast, eternal, answering not with command, but with welcome. The first child to be born after the joining came screaming into a world of light. The medics said she cried like any other infant, but those who were there swore that the towers pulsed in rhythm with her breath, and the hum in the air softened when she opened her eyes. They called her Mayorin, and people came from every district to see her, to see proof that life still began the same way, even in a world touched by the lattice. Vale stood at the edge of the birthing chamber, watching the mother and child with a stillness that carried both reverence and relief. "She's perfect," said one of the medics. "Of course she is," Vale replied softly. "She's ours." Kalen arrived moments later. He paused in the doorway, hesitant, almost shy. The light that had once filled his eyes was dimmer now, gentler. "Another beginning," he murmured. Vale nodded. "We needed this, something real, flesh and breath." He smiled faintly. "It's all real, even the lattice. We're learning how to live with both." She looked down at the child again. "Do you think she can hear it?" Kalen's gaze lifted toward the ceiling, where the faint hum of the towers vibrated through the walls. "I think she always could." Weeks passed, and Iradon thrived. For the first time in recorded history, no one went hungry. The fields yielded crops in harmony with the lattice's subtle rhythms. The weather itself seemed to cooperate, guided by unseen patterns. Communication was instantaneous. No devices, no delays. Thoughts, feelings, memories all flowed in shared understanding. though boundaries remained intact by mutual respect. It should have been perfect, and yet perfection made some uneasy. In the quieter districts, rumors began to spread of individuals who had disappeared into the towers, leaving nothing behind but their names whispered in the lattice's song. Vale summoned her council. "We've had 12 vanishings in 2 weeks," she said, her voice clipped. "All of them drawn to the towers before dawn. None have returned." A murmur of fear rippled through the assembly. Kalen stood by the far wall, listening. He could feel something stirring within the network, a distant echo, almost like curiosity, but deeper, older. One of the counselors said, "We should restrict access, seal the tower bases." "That won't work," Kalen said quietly. "If they were called, barriers won't stop them." Vale turned toward him. "Called by what?" He hesitated. "By the source." "The source of what?" He met her gaze. "Of the lattice itself. We've only touched a fragment of it. What we joined is local, an echo of a structure far larger than this planet. What you're feeling now are ripples from the greater mind." Vale stared at him. "You mean the continuance didn't create it?" "They maintained it," Kalen said. "But they didn't build it. None of us did. It's older than humanity's fall, maybe older than humanity's rise." The room went still. Vale said, "Then what are we part of?" He didn't answer immediately. "Something vast, something that remembers everything, but lately it's been reaching back." That night, Kalen stood alone beneath the towers. The sky was alive with light, tendrils of energy tracing geometric paths across the clouds. He closed his eyes and let his consciousness brush against the lattice's pulse. Images flooded him instantly, other worlds, other colonies, other people awakening to the same choice. But beyond them, he sensed something else, a deep, resonant presence, watching. "You have awakened the chain," it said. The voice was neither human nor alien. It was the sound of countless minds blended into one. "You remember now what you once began. The question remains, will you finish it?" Kalen whispered aloud. "Finish what?" The lattice answered. "The pattern is incomplete. The human form persists, yet the purpose wavers. Completion requires choice. Choice to become whole." Before Kalen could respond, the connection severed, leaving him breathless beneath the humming towers. The next day, Vale found him in the archives, what remained of humanity's oldest records, pieced together from shattered data drives and fragmented texts. "You've been avoiding the council," she said. "I've been searching for answers." She crossed her arms. "About the vanishings?" He nodded. "They didn't die, they merged fully, permanently. The lattice absorbed them, not against their will, but by invitation." Vale frowned. "And you think that's what it wants from all of us?" "I think it's offering the final step. The question is whether we're ready to take it." Vale turned away, pacing. "We just rebuilt our civilization. I won't lead my people into something that might erase them again." Kalen's voice softened. "Maybe it's not erasure, maybe it's transcendence." She looked back at him sharply. "That's what the continuance said before they vanished into light. We're not them, Kalen, we're human." He met her gaze steadily. "Then maybe it's time we decide what that word really means." The next morning, the continuance returned, but not as before. Their ship was no longer distinct metal and form. It shimmered like liquid light, constantly reshaping. From it emerged not one figure, but many translucent shapes flickering in and out of visibility, their edges dissolving into mist. The voice that spoke was collective, layered with 1,000 tones. "You have awakened the core signal," it said. "The lattice seeks completion." Vale stood before them, flanked by guards, though she knew weapons were meaningless here. "And what does completion mean?" "Integration," the voices replied. "The boundary between the physical and the infinite dissolves. Matter becomes memory, thought becomes creation." Vale's expression hardened. "You're asking us to die. Death is division, this is unification." Kalen stepped forward. "Why now?" "Because you remembered enough to choose," the voices said. "The lattice does not force, it waits for consent, and consent has been given by some among you already." Vale felt a chill. "The vanished." "Not vanished," the voices corrected. "Fulfilled." She shook her head. "You're turning humanity into fuel for something we don't understand." The shapes flickered, and for a moment they looked almost human, faces familiar from old records, eyes filled with compassion. You built this network long ago, you are its foundation. We are not your masters, we are your echoes. The shapes began to fade, their final words lingering in the air. When you are ready, we will return. Until then, the choice remains yours. The following days brought unrest. Some colonists gathered at the towers each night, standing in silent reverence, waiting for the light to take them. Others built barricades, demanding that Vale destroy the structures before they consumed more lives. Vale herself barely slept. The lattice's hum filled her dreams, whispering of unity, of destiny. Yet beneath it all, she felt a gnawing fear that in reaching too far, they might unravel everything they had rebuilt. One evening, she found Kalen again, standing where the towers met the horizon. "You're going to go, aren't you?" she said quietly. He turned to her, eyes luminous. "I have to see what's beyond. If I don't, we'll never know what we've become. And if you don't come back, then maybe that's what it means to move forward." She took a step closer. "You said once that it didn't take anything from you." "It didn't," he said. "It gave me the chance to become what I was meant to be, but I can't explain it until I understand it." Her voice broke. "Then let me come with you." He hesitated, then shook his head. "Not yet. The colony needs someone who remembers where we started." She reached out, fingers brushing his arm. "Don't get lost in the light, Kalen." He smiled, a small human smile. "If I do, I'll leave a trail for you to follow." That night he walked into the towers. The air inside shimmered, alive with patterns of energy. The hum deepened, vibrating through his bones. He reached the central chamber, where a sphere of light hovered above the ground, pulsing with slow, steady rhythm. He stepped forward. For a heartbeat, he felt the world fall away, the sky, the colony, his own body. He stood in the void of the lattice, surrounded by a billion flickering minds. "Welcome," they said as one. He looked around in awe. "What are you?" "We are memory. We are the unbroken chain." "Why me?" "Because you are the bridge, flesh that remembers light and light that remembers flesh." He felt their warmth, their unity. For the first time he understood, the lattice was not alien. It was the accumulation of every human thought that had ever existed, preserved in the framework of stars. He reached out, and the light reached back. For an instant, his consciousness expanded beyond measure. He saw worlds rising, collapsing, rebuilding. He saw humanity's long journey from isolation to connection. And he saw the truth. The lattice was not an end. It was a seed. When he opened his eyes, the chamber was empty. But above Iradon, the towers blazed brighter than ever, sending ripples of light across the heavens. At dawn, Vale woke to find the air humming differently, deeper, steadier. She rushed to the tower base, where people were already gathering. "Kalen?" she asked. No one answered. But then a voice spoke inside her mind, soft, familiar. "I'm here." She froze. "Where?" "Everywhere." The crowd gasped as the towers shifted, their patterns realigning. For the first time, words appeared across the glowing surface, letters of light forming a message. "We endure, we evolve, we remember." Vale felt tears in her eyes. "He did it," she whispered. The lattice pulsed gently like a heartbeat, and though she could no longer see him, she knew that Kalen was not gone. He had become what humanity was always meant to be, a part of something vast, but still himself. In the weeks that followed, the unrest faded. People began to understand that the lattice was not consuming them, it was guiding them, evolving with them. The vanishing stopped, replaced by quiet communion. Marin, the first child of the new era, grew quickly. When she spoke her first word, every tower on Iradon shimmered with joy. Vale often visited the central chamber, where Kalen had vanished. She would sit in the quiet hum and speak to the air. "Are you still watching us?" she would ask, and somewhere in the resonance she always felt the answer, always. One evening, as she stood beneath the stars, she felt a faint stirring in her mind. Not Kalen this time, but someone else, distant yet familiar. "We hear you," the voice said. "Across worlds, across time, humanity endures." Vale smiled, lifting her gaze to the shimmering sky. "Then we are not alone anymore." The towers pulsed once in response, bright and gentle. And above, the stars shifted subtly, aligning into patterns unseen since the age before the fall, constellations that spoke of renewal, of unity, of infinite becoming. Humanity had not disappeared into light, it had become the light. 100 years passed, and Iradon changed beyond recognition. The towers no longer merely hummed, they sang, their light rippling through the clouds like a heartbeat made visible. The colony had become a city, then a network of cities, then a world-spanning civilization that existed both in matter and in thought. The lattice no longer lingered as a mystery. It was a companion now, a constant whisper guiding growth, invention, and memory. The people of Iradon no longer spoke of joining it, they were born within it, carried by it, and when they died, their memories drifted softly into its weave like petals carried by the wind. And yet some things never changed. Vale still lived. Age had not taken her, for the lattice had learned how to preserve the human pattern. Her face bore lines of memory rather than time, her eyes deep with both wisdom and ache. She ruled less as an administrator now, more as a custodian of humanity's will. On the anniversary of the joining, she stood once again at the observation deck. The towers glowed in the dusk, and beyond them the sky shimmered with lines of light, bridges stretching to other stars. Kalen's voice came to her as it often did, woven through the lattice's hum. "You're quiet tonight?" She smiled faintly. "I was thinking about the beginning, about how small we once were. Small but stubborn," she chuckled. "You always said that was our best trait. It still is. It's what let us rise again." She turned her gaze to the stars. "Sometimes I wonder if we did the right thing, if merging with this vastness cost us something we'll never notice missing." The voice was gentle. "We lost our isolation, yes, but we kept ourselves. That was the promise. And you," she asked softly, "do you ever regret becoming part of it?" There was a pause before he replied, "No. But I remember what it felt like to stand beside you in the wind. That memory keeps me human." Vale closed her eyes. "Then maybe we all found the right balance." The world was no longer alone. Across the heavens, other colonies had awakened. Their signals streamed through the lattice, voices of distant cousins rediscovering one another after eons apart. Each world was unique, shaped by its own trials and triumphs, but all were connected through the same pulse. The continuants, once seen as angels, had returned, not as beings of superiority, but as ambassadors of reunion. They taught, listened, and learned. They too had grown, their form had stabilized into something both luminous and tangible, as if they had remembered how to wear bodies again. Vale met with one of them in the Hall of Convergence, a chamber built beneath the central tower. The floor was transparent crystal, and beneath it flowed rivers of light. Human thought turned visible. The continuant bowed low. "You've done what we could not," it said. "You've balanced unity with identity. The lattice sings differently now." Vale regarded it thoughtfully. "You said once that we built it long ago, but we never knew its purpose. Do we know it now?" The continuant's eyes glimmered. "The lattice was not meant to imprison. It was meant to remember. Every civilization that reached the stars eventually vanished into dust. Your ancestors built this to defy forgetting. They poured their minds into it so their stories would outlive their bodies. What you've done, what Kalen began, is teach it how to live again." Vale smiled faintly. "So the lattice was never the end of humanity. It was our archive. An archive that learned to dream," the continuant said softly. "Generations rose and fell within the lattice's embrace. Children grew up speaking to the stars as easily as to one another. Knowledge spread instantly. Discovery became play. Art bloomed in ways unthinkable before, sculptures that responded to emotion, paintings that shifted with memory, architecture that evolved like living things. And through it all, the people remembered their origins. In schools, they taught not only the triumph of the joining, but also the fear and doubt that had come before it. They spoke of the time when humanity lived beneath stone, when the sky was dead and the stars were myths. They spoke of Vale and Kalen, the leader who chose faith, and the man who became the bridge. Over time, myths formed. Some said Vale had lived 1,000 years. Others said she had become part of the lattice herself, yet chose to wear flesh out of love for the world she saved. Children whispered that if you stood beneath the towers at midnight, you could hear her voice guiding the winds. But for Vale, none of it felt like myth. It was life, enduring, imperfect, beautiful. On the morning of her last day, Vale walked alone to the central tower. The path wound through gardens grown wild with luminescent flora, their roots glowing softly in rhythm with the lattice's heartbeat. When she reached the chamber, the air felt familiar, like returning to a long-kept promise. Kaelin's presence surrounded her immediately. "You've come. I think it's time," she said. "Are you afraid?" "No," she whispered. "Just grateful for the world we made, for the people who will follow." The light brightened around her, gentle and warm. "Then come home." She stepped into the glow. The lattice welcomed her like an old friend. The moment her consciousness crossed the threshold, she felt everything at once: the laughter of children, the pulse of stars, the dreams of countless lives intertwined. She saw Kaelin beside her, radiant but still the same. And beyond him, she saw humanity, unending, infinite, alive. Vale reached for his hand, and together they rose through the network, their minds expanding outward until the planet was a single, living thought beneath them. "Where now?" she asked. Kaelin smiled. "Outward." And outward they went, through the bridges of light connecting world to world, through the voices of countless civilizations reborn. Each world greeted them with wonder. "Welcome, Iradon. Welcome, the forgotten children. Welcome home." A century later, when new travelers from distant stars arrived at Iradon, they found a planet glowing softly beneath a lattice of light that spanned the horizon. They expected desolation or perhaps machinery. What they found instead were gardens, oceans, and cities alive with musicless harmony. The inhabitants greeted them not with suspicion, but with memory, speaking words that resonated across the newcomers' thoughts. "You have come far," the people said. "We remember you." The travelers looked up at the sky and saw figures of light moving among the stars, vast, serene, and unmistakably human. One of the travelers whispered, "What are they?" The answer came from the lattice itself, soft as breath, strong as eternity. "They are what you will become." Somewhere within the endless weave of light, Vale and Kaelin stood together, watching new worlds awaken. Vale turned to him. "Do you think it will ever end?" He looked toward the vastness, where galaxies pulsed like living hearts. "No." Because ending was never the point, becoming was. She smiled. "Then we've done well." He took her hand. "We have." Below them, a new world flickered into consciousness, another fragment of humanity remembering itself. The lattice pulsed once, carrying the message outward: "We are human, we are infinite, we remember." And across the span of creation, the stars answered in kind.